Welcome back to the most powerful RTR in the hands of the buying public, asterisk. And what makes this the most powerful? Well, so far it's been a controller swap, and because this was an RTR Lite originally, a battery swap. But now for the final piece of that puzzle, a motor swap. And spoiler alert, it is not going to be the high torque mod motor. In fact, it's going to be even torquier. And in typical fashion with this bike and this build, I'm gonna be putting in a motor that was not meant for it. And I think I have the perfect candidate, which is this Sotion GTS11-C. And I have a theory that this actually is the perfect candidate because it's actually, in a weird way, made for the RTR and might even bolt right up. And here's my reason why. Way back in 2022, Electro Co had their original ETM, the ETM Mini, which was basically just a rebadged Mototech or Venom or any other name brand 48-volt style bike, but had their ETM 1.0 kit in it and a 72-volt battery, so it was so much more powerful out of the box. They also sold this ETM kit separately, so you could update your Mototech or Venom or whatever, and in this kit it included a direct fit bolt-on motor. This motor has been updated over the years and is now currently sold as the ETM 2.0. And you may already see where I'm going with this, but that ETM 2.0 motor looks suspiciously like the RTR motor. And I'm not saying that these two motors are the exact same. In fact, visually, if you look at the pictures online, you can actually see a difference alone in the output shaft. The RTR's is much bigger, but it would make sense that if Electro Co is making these motors, that they would be able to utilize the same case for both of them. That would mean that the RTR here has the same mounting points as the Mototech, Venom, E-Box, or any of the other bikes they list this motor for. So another upgrade motor for one of these bikes from another company, like Sotion, could actually work. Now this is all just my theory at this point, but time to prove it by pulling out the RTR's motor and lining them up. All right, let's see what we're working with. So here you can kind of see what I mean when these are almost plug and play, or at least I hope that they are. Because right here, this is the ENC motor, of course. You can see that it's on this bracket with these two big bolts right here that mount to the swing arm, but this is mounted onto the motor in 3 distinct spots. So basically one every, what is that, 120 degrees? These look like they are the exact same as this one because the Mototech, the Venom, all of those other ones are also mounted with 3 distinct mounting holes. So I should be able to just take this off, mount it straight onto this, and we should be good to go. Well, so much for plug and play. It looks like it would fit, and I got one bolt in here to start, but then once this is in, you could maybe see here, there we go, now that it's focused, you can see that it's ever so slightly off. Even though there is a little bit of play in this, with that play, you can see that the backside of the threads right here is underneath the bracket. So anytime I would try, no matter what the position, to thread that in, it would be going in at an angle and cross threading. Same goes for this bolt hole right here. It's just ever so slightly off, like annoyingly so. And I'm actually not going to be blaming the motor because the funny thing is I actually had this exact same problem with this exact same motor when I was mounting it up to a 48-volt Mototech frame. I had to drill out 2 of the 3 holes in order for it to clear and not cross thread. So I'm wondering if this motor is an early enough version, it is a V1, they're selling the V2s right now, that maybe it's early enough in the production run where there was just a little bit of fine tuning that needed to be done to this thing and it wasn't 100% lined up. But not an issue in this case because I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the Mototech and just drill out 2 of the 3 holes to make them a little larger so that way the bolt goes through cleanly. Oh my god, I need a drill press stat. That's better. Look at that, we got a Sotion motor inside the RTR, and as much as I would love to say that this is all it takes and we can hook up the chain and hook up everything else and get riding, it's really not that simple. In fact, there's a lot more that I have to do to this thing to make it work. See, even though we've addressed the mounting of these two, and those are the same, there are a lot more differences between this motor and this motor, depending on your perspective. Like this perspective, where you can plainly see that the output shaft for the Electro Co motor is much longer, and with the difference between this and the Sotion motor, I don't know, there might be some chain alignment issues. And if you take that perspective and zoom out a little, you can see more differences between these two in just the size of the motors themselves. Again, the Electro Co motor is taller than the Sotion motor. So unfortunately, plug and play, it is not. However, However, we were able to see that it will clearly fit inside of the swing arm. It's just a matter of making some fixes to the brackets and to the mounting of this motor so that everything aligns properly and works as it's intended. So to get those fixes, I need to do some measurements here and probably some trims and cuts there in order to get everything lined up the way it's supposed to. It's just now a matter of figuring out what those fixes are. And now I think we have it. All it took was two of my favorite things, general hackery and math. The first thing was to align the front sprocket. Because the shaft on this motor is so much shorter than the other one, I had to cut down the bracket in order to account for that so it would sit closer up to the swing arm. I figured out this length by lining up the Electro Co motor against some scrap 2x4 and marked the center of that sprocket. Did the exact same with the Sotion and marked that. Then these two lines gave me the difference that I needed, which was about 9¼ millimeters. So I just marked 9.25 millimeters on this bracket and got to cutting. What could go wrong? Well, as good as I measured that, it doesn't really matter unless you cut it appropriately. I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but this one right here, yeah, it's a little shorter than this one right here. And this is the height it's supposed to be. You can see the Sharpie mark on this one. Not this side. I cut on the wrong Sharpie side. Thankfully, it's not the end of the world. I have a lot of washers in the spare drawer, and I was able to find one that is particularly thick. So I made sure that I filed this one down enough that the difference between these two posts is the width of this washer. So I'm just gonna have one additional washer on that side of the mount. So with that crisis averted, now it's just clean up on this. I've already filed everything away, so it's nice and smooth. There's no burrs or anything, but now I have to get the inside with this thread. So it's an M8 by 1.25. So I'm just gonna chase the threads a little bit and make sure that they're clean. Another thing I noticed with this bolt is that the threads for these are not all the way through, and because I shortened this up, I'm gonna need all the threads that I can, so I'm just gonna take this and continue all the way through it, so that way it's threaded as much as it possibly can be, so that way I have enough room for the existing bolts. And as a final touch, I just added a little bit of spray paint to the shorter end here, so that way I know easily which side needs that extra washer. But that's not quite everything. While I could be able to mount this up and maybe it would be okay, realistically, with only two bolts here and being on the same plane, yeah, I don't really trust that. I much rather mount this in the exact same way that the stock motor is mounted, where it has another two bolts on the backside to really lock it in between the swing arms. So for the backside here, bring on the hackery. Although this is a little more precise than I tend to be. I measured the differences of these two cases and I added this amount to what I took off of the bracket to determine that I need about 13 millimeters or so of space to make up. Not only that, but the back motor bracket on the stock bike has a different bolt pattern than the back of the Sotion motor, so there's no way that it's just gonna line up like that. I can't get that lucky. So with even more measurements, I made this, an adapter bracket with 3 distinct holes that line up exactly with the threaded holes on the back of the Sotion motor. I mocked this up in Tinkercad and made a few test cuts with some construction paper to make sure that it was correct before sending it out to Send Cut Send, which cut this same shape into a 9.5 millimeter thick piece of aluminum. And with a couple of washers, I was able to bolt this up to the back and accounts for the 13 millimeters of space I need. So now comes the hack part of it. While this side will mount up to the swing arm just fine, this side doesn't have any other holes for the other piece of the bracket. That's because this needs to be clocked in a very specific area to the other side here, and I don't know what that specific angle is going to be. So I think the best way in order to figure that out is just to simply mount this with the motor and mount this onto the swing arm to see where it lines up to the aluminum spacer. That way I can mark those holes, punch them out, drill them out, thread them out, so that way I can get the bolts in and have a perfect Sotion adapter.
I'm glad I did my math right, because now as it's all bolted up, it is perfectly aligned. The chain feels great. The bike feels even better. First thing I noticed right off the bat is just the sound of this bike, and that there's a lot less of it.
You know, I think in a prior video I blamed the motor to some extent for the sheer noise that this bike makes, the creakiness in the drivetrain and in the swing arm, but it's still making that noise. I guess we'll never be able to get rid of that.
I mean, the Sotion motor has its own unique kind of whir to it, but the RTR one just really has its own that's just amplified. I feel like now it's a lot more stealthy, a lot more actual e-bikey. Is e-bikey a word? It is now.
I almost forgot to mention stats. The stock motor here is rated up to 5,250 RPM and up to 8 kilowatts of power. The Sotion bumps those same numbers up to 6,500 RPM and up to 10 kilowatts of power. So I think it's gonna handle all the added power that we've given this bike in the form of the new controller and the new battery. All right, backing up a little bit before we even go on the first ride, I wanna see what the temperatures are with that same run that I did the last time when I put the battery in this thing and ran that up and down the street with the stock motor. So this is going to be a little bit before, where we just hit the outside of the case here, so we can get an ambient temperature, which today is 72 degrees. So let's see what happens after we run it.
All right, I don't think this is going to impact the top speed or the general acceleration of things, but let's give it a rip and see what happens. Oh, accounting for traffic, of course. Look at that blast past the traffic here. Woo! My gosh, this thing is torquey. Even going like 45 miles an hour for just cruising at like 40 here and hit it. It just pulls. Again, with the sound, when you're up to speed, it actually sounds kind of like it's almost got a bit of a rev whine, like if you had a supercharger. And this is the best part of this torque, is just going up this super steep hill and just flying up it. Whoa! Actually jumping off the little bumps in the road. What a riot.
Alright, so we did the exact same route, ripped it the exact same amount. The last time we did this with a stock motor. Let's see how hot that baby is. Survey says 120, so it's 10 degrees cooler than it was in the same circumstances with the RTR's motor. Pretty cool, literally. You know, with all these latest mods, it kind of brings up a bit of a philosophical question that I've been pondering, because we replaced some major components to this bike. The controller, the battery pack, and now the motor with non-Electro Co components. And it makes me wonder, is it still an RTR? At what point is this bike no longer the one that it once was? Is the soul of the bike in the frame and the designs and the aesthetic, or is it in the power that it makes? That's a lot to consider. But either way, I think I have a simple solution to address it. There we go.
Finally an RTR with all the torque. Honestly, not too hard to uncork all the RPMs, all while running cool. I'm stoked it worked. This is gonna rule.